He'll be talking on education for democracy, Professor Panikkar's contribution. I request Professor M.V. Narayanan to come over, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I was hoping that I'll get a little bit more time, but as things go, that doesn't seem to be the case. Before I start, let me first pay my deep and solemn respects to the memory of Professor K.N. Panikkar, who left us a few days ago, leaving behind what can only be called an unignorable legacy and lingering memories of a towering presence in our intellectual life, particularly in the historical fields of inquiry. If you are to consider the intellectual legacy of Professor Panikkar, specifically focusing on his interventions in the field of education, the first thought that comes to mind is that for Professor Panikkar, education was never a standalone pedagogical concern, or merely a matter of literacy or vocational training, or even of the age-old and oft-repeated idea of character building of individuals. It was a deeply societal and political domain, inextricably entwined with questions of citizenship, the making of the nation, the craft of the state, and ultimately those of power. In fact, it will not be an exaggeration to say that education is a vital center of his larger vision for a secular and democratic India. He viewed the classroom as the primary site where the secular common sense, a term which we shall come back to later as probably one of the most important, categories that he has developed, where the secular common sense is the nation is either fortified or dismantled. In his framework, a secular democracy cannot survive on constitutional provisions alone. It requires a citizenry whose consciousness is rooted in pluralism and rational inquiry, and which holds the state accountable. To this end, education has to become the primary site for the construction of a critical and secular democratic consciousness, and in that sense, for him, it is also a site of a political struggle. My attempt in this presentation is not a critical evaluation or even an assessment of Panikkar's contributions or thoughts. It is only an overview, especially in the context of how whatever that he warned us about have literally come to pass. It will be to explore how he linked the health of the Republic to the character and content of the classroom, his warnings regarding the communalization of knowledge, and his profound rejection of the false binaries that often trap Indian intellectual discourses. Finally, we'll also look at Panikkar's own praxis, how he functioned as a public intellectual, extending the duties of a teacher into the heart of civil society. To understand Panikkar's views on education, one must first situate it as an integral part of his vision of secular democracy. He did not view secularism as a static constitutional provision, but as a lived reality that is always in the making and must be constantly renewed in practice. Education in its framework is a vital engine or even the fulcrum of this practice. In his 2001 paper, With the Indian Education, Panikkar provides a foundational premise of his critique. If I may quote, education in India is at a crossroads. Its liberal and secular character and content, carefully nourished during the last 50 years, is now undergoing fundamental transformation. To place this statement in context, we will have to remember that the BJP had come to power at the center in 1998 under the Prime Ministership of A.B. Vajpayee, and that under the stewardship of Professor Murli Manohar Joshi, serious efforts had been initiated to transform the educational system of the country into a model in keeping with the majoritarian ideology of Hindutva. For Panikkar, a secular democracy cannot survive if the educational systems function as a mere ideological apparatus of the state to serve ruling class interests. Instead, in a genuine democracy, education must foster a secular common sense. In a sense, this idea of a secular common sense is a cornerstone, probably even the theoretical underpinning of Panikkar's thinking, contrasted as it is with a communal common sense. Similar, but not reducible, to Althusser's notion of ideology as a lived relationship to reality, common sense here turns into a multidimensional concept that subsumes an individual's ways of seeing and understanding the world, ordering and organizing it in terms of what is true and what is not, of what can be believed and what cannot be, and with reference to real or imaginary groupings, hierarchies, affiliations, and historical processes. To put it differently, it is that acquired faculty through which one makes sense of the world. It is this that education has a primary responsibility in formulating and guiding, because it is a bedrock upon which the nation and its citizens understand themselves and their reality. He warns that when the state begins to engineer education based on ideological needs rather than the requirements of society, the very guiding principles of our republic are placed in jeopardy. A crucial aspect of Panikkar's ideas on education, as with his positions in history, is his pointed refusal to accept the binary between Western and indigenous knowledge, a binary frequently weaponized by sectarian political agendas. He identified this as a strategy used to mask communal interests under the guise of cultural nationalism. The right wing invariably seeks to delegitimize secular and scientific values by labeling them as alien or foreign or Western. In response, they propose a version of indigenization that he finds deeply suspicious. He writes, all these strategies, quotes, all these strategies appear to be at work in foregrounding a new system of education that uncritically privileges the indigenous and celebrates the religious. In another place, he actually points to this whole idea of the indigenous and this binary itself as not something that is intrinsically indigenous, but something that has been borrowed or has been taken over from the theories of James Mill and the colonial context in which such a binary was actually created. And ironically, that even while the right wing seems to be objecting to colonialism and creating what they call is another contrary kind of principle, they are in effect reduplicating in another language the very same colonial binaries that served to actually divide India into the so-called concept of the Hindu and the Muslim. He rejects this because the indigenous being promoted is not the actual pluralistic history of India, but a communally tailored local history. By framing the conflict as a battle against Western influence, the sectarian agenda successfully, quotes, displaces whatever secular and universal content and outlook the existing system has managed to incorporate. To Panikkar, an authentic Indian education must be universal in its humanism while remaining rooted in the country's pluralistic reality. Another major issue that he did address has been the question of democratization versus universalization in terms of the functional goals of education. The common policy assumption that simply increasing the enrollment is enough to save democracy does not find acceptance with Panikkar. He makes a sharp distinction between universalization in terms of quantity and democratization in terms of quality and character. In the article Secular and Democratic Education in 1999, he notes the democratization of education is universally recognized as integral to a secular, a democratic polity and society. One view tends to equate democratization with universalization. The latter, however, is only a necessary condition. Quotes closed. That universalization without democratic content is dangerous is a point that he tries to bring forward here. If the content is conformist or communal, then universalizing education simply spreads that conformity even further, and it becomes a much more dangerous proposition. Genuine democratization requires that the character and content of education empower the student to participate in a secular, democratic life in a manner that can foster a critical kind of thinking. In a similar vein, Panikkar is also acutely aware of the threats of privatization and wary of how private managements and caste and communal interests undermine progressive policies. It is in his critique of the privatization of educational infrastructure that Panikkar's egalitarian mission is probably most evident. In Quest for Quality in Higher Education, an article in the 2000s, he writes, quotes, being a field of common good, it is desirable that a consensus is achieved on the broad contours of policy on higher education. Panikkar's writings on the Kerala model and national policy emphasize that quality and access must go hand in hand to achieve social justice. In fact, he identifies a dual threat to social justice. The first is a quality gap, in which migration of students happen because of inadequately equipped library and laboratories and teachers with poor academic ability. It is a system that denies quality to the masses and so, by definition, undemocratic. The second threat is that of vested interests. He warns that private managements are trying to undo the progressive policy of higher education and that the state often begins to wilt and compromise under pressure of caste and communal interests. For Panikkar, a socially just system is one where the state ensures a fairly strong foundation in structure, quality, and access for all citizens. But probably the most urgent theme in Panikkar's later work is the onslaught of communalism. He views religious interventions not just as a change in the curriculum, but as a total transformation of the secular common sense. In his 1999 article, he warns of the RSS and affiliated organizations attempting to transform communalized knowledge into social knowledge. The attempt to replace secular common sense with communal common sense is accentuated by the role of organizations that use large-scale pamphleteering to transform communalized knowledge into social knowledge. In 1999, it was pamphleteering. In 2026, it's the social media. And the power and the strength and the reach has not just multiplied, but has become a geometrical multiplication, if that is a correct term to use. It is in this context that he identified that the cultural domain as a whole is under siege, words which probably make much more sense to us today than it probably did in 1999. He warned that the state would use its finesse to obscure partisan interests by imputing cultural or national explanations for their initiatives, a tactic we see today in the rebranding of exclusionary policies as decolonial or indigenous. By creating communally tailored local histories, as referred before, the sectarian agenda ensures that the real history of the people is likely to be marginalized. This process creates a conformist society, which is the only environment in which fundamentalism can thrive. Writing in the late 1990s and in the early 2000s, 25 years back, Panikkar was remarkably prescient regarding the trajectory of Indian education under right-wing influence. He was among the first to identify the convergence of interests of both communalism and globalization. He foresaw that while communalism would provide the ideological control, globalization would provide the transnational capital and entrepreneurial interests to commodify education for the creation of a labor force that best serves the interests of global capital. Panikkar believed that the ultimate defense of democracy lies in the student's ability to think critically. Education must foster a counterculture, he repeated several times over several years. A conformist society is the only environment, as we saw before, in which fundamentalism can thrive and transnational capital can operate successfully. Therefore, he thought that resistance has to start with each individual student. Panikkar calls for the organization of a countercultural movement, counter both to communalism and globalization, in arguing that education is an area in which both these can be creatively attempted. He places the burden of change on the academic community. He asserts, quotes, the initiative in this direction rests with progressive teachers and student organizations to act as monitoring cells against the communalization of campuses. He advocates for the formulation of an education policy or policies through democratic processes involving wide-ranging consultations with the public rather than top-down ideological shifts. Now, Panikkar's work in life is a testament to the idea that the role of a teacher does not end at the campus gate. Yes, he was a teacher, a researcher, unfortunately a university vice chancellor, and also a policy maker. Equally importantly, he functioned as a public intellectual who saw the wider society as an extension of the classroom and communicated with that society through diverse channels. He believed that the academic community had a moral obligation to intervene when the cultural domain as a whole is under siege. His role, I would say, was characterized by two main functions. He was an ardent proponent of moving policy making out of bureaucratic offices and into the public sphere. In his article, Quest for Quality, He highlights how he sought to formulate policy through quotes, wide-ranging discussion and consultation with students, teachers, educationists, political leaders, and the public, especially when he was in charge of the Kerala Higher Education Council. By doing so, he attempted to transform educational policy into a democratic dialogue, which would also have the function of creating a consciousness among the people about what was actually taking place within the domain of education. Panikkar did not just write or teach or research. He did all of them, but he also organized. He endeavored to implement progressive, people-centered, student-centered policies. The introduction of the choice-based credit semester system in Kaladi as the first time it was done in Kerala, and the way in which it was brought in at a later point of time over the whole of Kerala in all the universities are instances of this. In Panikkar's view, it was actually intended as one in which the students will get the onus of choice. The right of choice will be with the students. But the teachers in our community, in our colleges, being much more adept at these things than the students themselves, ensured that that choice was taken away from them and that the choice still remained with them. This is history, despite Panikkar's best efforts. So he viewed the intellectual's task, did not just write or teach, he also organized. He argued that the initiative for defending secularism rests with progressive teachers and students' organizations who must act as monitoring cells within society to check the advance of communal forces. He viewed the intellectual's task as one of active vigilance, being the first to identify when the state uses finesse, obscuring and universalizing partisan interests under the guise of so-called national interest. K.N. Panikkar leaves us with a mandate for resistance. His call for the organization of a countercultural movement and the creation of the foundations of a democratic educational system is also part of a larger creation of a critical culture, not just in the student, but in society at large. As a public intellectual, Panikkar demonstrated that the struggle for education is a struggle for the republic itself. He reminds us the state cannot afford to change its policy every 5 years when the government changes. Education must be a stable, secular groundwork. Our task is to ensure that the classroom remains a site of liberation, inquiry, and above all, the beating heart of a secular democratic society. The quest for quality is not merely an academic one, it is a quest for the survival of a secular pluralist democracy. In conclusion, let me just say this. In the contemporary landscape, Panikkar's warnings find a chilling resonance within the framework of the national educational policy. He foresaw the convergence of communalism and globalization that today drives a top-down, centralized educational agenda, one that systematically undermines the federalist principles of the Constitution by stripping states of their autonomy to shape policy according to their specific social realities. As the union government increasingly intervenes to enforce a single ideological vision or a common educational system, unified educational system, the onslaught of Panikkar that Panikkar predicted on the secular and plural character of education has become a lived reality. At the same time, one is also sorry to say that his critique extends somewhat to the present state of affairs in Kerala too, where even the traditional bastions of resistance appear to be faltering. Apart from the steady erosion of an earlier vibrant culture of informed resistance, among teachers and students, and the growth of a rather resigned acceptance of the game of rankings, numbers, and percentages, there is also the none too veiled kowtowing to central directives, facilitated unfortunately by state agencies like the Higher Education Council, other government bodies, and of higher education institutions in general, under the rather weak rationale best expressed in the oft repeated phrase, do we have a choice? In a manner of speaking, this represents the very wilting and compromise that Panikkar feared and warned against. He had cautioned that when the state surrenders its progressive foundations to accommodate external pressures, whether from the center or from vested interests, it betrays the field of common good. To engage with Panikkar today is to recognize that the defense of educational freedom is inseparable from the defense of federalism. It requires a rejection of the institutional compliance in favor of a renewed struggle for a state-led, secular, democratic system that refuses to be an instrument of centralizing or sectarian power. It is to recognize that we do have a choice. Thank you.
Yeah, can I just speak now? Am I visible? I'm audible, but I'm not visible. Is that so?
Professor Patnaik, like you're audible actually, but I think there is a problem with the video. So we can go with the audio if that is okay with you.
But whatever you say, because if you think that it should be rescheduled, I'll try and fix it. In which case I can speak tomorrow.
Okay, so we can reschedule it for tomorrow. I'll find a slot for you. Is that fine? Then we'll go with the other speaker, next speaker. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we'll reschedule your talk for
Okay.
tomorrow.
Right. Thank you. Please tell me the new time. I'll get it fixed by about 2 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah, thank you
Okay.
so much. Like, yeah, okay.
I'm very sorry about it.
It's
I'm
okay. You don't
extremely
need to be
sorry.
sorry. It happens. Technical error
Please.
happens. Yeah. Thank you
Okay.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
We are really sorry. Now we'll continue with the session education, and I request Professor A.R. Venkatachalapati. His title is Make Dictators, Professionalization of Tamil Teachers in Colonial India. Thank you.
Vanakkam, good afternoon. It is a very solemn occasion for me. Professor Panikkar was my teacher at JNU, and as I approach retirement, I recall that without his support, I'd not be where I am. And I also believe that this particular paper that I'm giving, he would actually like it, even with all its faults and inadequacies. I think he would have really liked this paper. With that thought, I want to inflict this somewhat very long paper on you. It is part of a larger book project. I don't know when I'll complete this, but let me make a preliminary presentation. It is about the professionalization of teaching in colonial India, but I am going to be focusing on the category of Tamil teachers. We have a huge body of literature on the history of education. There are tons of stuff on colonial education policy, the creation of Western educational institutions, its impact on the making of a intelligentsia and a middle class. But what I am going to be doing is focus on the character of the teacher. it's actually very surprising that despite the frequent references that you find to teachers in all autobiographies, if you read the autobiography of any intellectual of the 19th or 20th centuries, anywhere in India, you would certainly encounter the figure of the teacher who actually transforms the particular subject in question. But very interestingly, as far as I am aware, there is no real study of the teachers as such. Here I am going to be focusing specially on Tamil teachers. I know that this Tamil teachers do not actually represent the universe of teachers, because the Tamil teacher has a very special place in Tamil culture. They have played very important roles, and almost on every occasion you would find that somebody would tell you that, there was a Tamil teacher who inspired us and who showed us the right path and helped us to make oneself in one's own life. That kind of special place the Tamil teacher has. So what I am going to be doing over the next 30-35 minutes, I have requested permission to eat into some of Professor Prabhat Patnaik's time. I know it's a double whammy. You miss Prabhat's talk and you also have to listen to me for some extra 10 minutes. But I hope to make up for that loss with what I hope is a very interesting topic which will set you thinking. Okay, the category of the Tamil teacher is, it's a new category. Prior to the introduction of language teaching as a separate specialization in colonial institutions, there was no separate category of language teaching, religious instruction, and secular education. Just you have to recall your readings about early colonial and pre-colonial educational institutions. We used to have the Thinnai Pallikudam, where the teacher practically imparted all kinds of knowledge, and only higher levels of knowledge were acquired in more specialized institutions like the religious monasteries, or if it was going to be artisanal and technical education, it would take place within the framework of the family and within a guild. So what happens in the early 19th century with the establishment of new kinds of schools? Let me start with the 1830s, early 1930s, when Thomas Munro was governor of Madras. He was the first to organize something called a board for public instruction, and this later, by the 1850s, even before the crown takes over, you have the institution of the Director of Public Instruction. DPI is an abbreviation which has valence to this day, and until even a few decades ago, the abbreviation DPI would send chills down the spines of many school headmasters and teachers. So what we find is that then this DPI takes care of all forms of education, secondary, primary, tertiary, whatever. And then of course we have in 1857 the establishment of the 3 universities. But let us be very clear, these universities were not teaching bodies at all, or they were not even research bodies. They were purely affiliating institutions. They were examining bodies, and that legacy continues to this day. So it was actually only in the early 19th century that Madras University begins to become a research institution. 1914, 1915, 1916 is the time the Department of Indian History, Department of Economics, they are all started. And it is not until the 1970s that they became teaching departments. This happened during the time of Malcolm Adisesha, the founder of MIDS, where I work. So Adisesha has said that, it doesn't seem like the professors here are doing any research. Let them at least teach. And I think he must be turning in his grave to see that 50 years later, they are also not teaching. But as Keshavan Veluthat once said about the professor of history at Madras University, and I told him he doesn't teach, he said that's the greatest service he's doing to the profession of history. Yeah. And I also remember when Panikkar came to visit me at the University of Madras in 2000, when I was briefly there, I asked him, please come to the department. He said, why should I come? I told him, it's been decades since a historian stepped into the department, please come. And that was unassailable logic. So he did come to the Department of Indian History. So in this situation, we also find with the coming in of the Macaulay's Minute of Education, what we find is the degradation and the inferiorization of language teaching, which is the running undercurrent of my paper. What is the status of language and language teaching in Indian education, which is a bane which continues to this day. If Indian languages were called vernaculars in a very pejorative sense, now we are reducing language to even worse word. For me, it is probably the worst word of abuse, to reduce language to a soft skill. When language becomes a soft skill, you know what kind of society we live in. So in this situation, we have language teachers as a category begin to emerge, and in the early days, they are actually called as munshis. It's a carryover from the Mughal Nawabi tradition. So language teachers are called munshis, and there used to be a category of head munshi and other munshis. But slowly this becomes a category called the Pandit, to which I will come shortly. At this time, they also create a new system of the Madras Educational Service, MES. So for a very long time, you would find letterheads where people would say, K. Ramunni Menon or S. Srinivas Iyengar, MES, Madras Educational Services. And this was a very peculiar system where at the head was the Director of Public Instruction, and below him, they were all men, below him were a category of inspectors and assistant inspectors. So until even the 1970s, the visit of an inspector to a school was something to be dreaded. That system was abolished, not because the system was a failure, but simply because the system became too huge with this huge explosion in educational institutions. So if you look at the reports of the Director of Public Instruction, which is an annual report, one of the most voluminous, detailed, and I must say extremely well written reports. These reports, all of them, talked about the very low quality of vernacular education. By vernacular, they meant all the Indian languages, and in the Madras Presidency, it included Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, Malayalam. These were the major languages, and uniformly the reports always talked about the inefficiency of the quality of vernacular education. And they also said the vernaculars are still largely in the hands of pundits of the old-fashioned type. And you can see ad nauseum in various forms and various different words, they describe the defects of the system of imparting vernacular education. For instance, they said, quote, vernacular education has been hitherto entrusted to persons of the Pandit class, some of whom possess considerable attainments in their own language, but who as a rule appear to be singularly deficient in the power of imparting knowledge to others. They also say that these Pandits are competent to guide intelligent and well-trained pupils to an idiomatic knowledge of the vernacular, but they are utterly unfit for the ordinary work of tuition. They have no system or what they have is bad. Moreover, with however good intentions, they cannot get over their old prejudices. So this is the kind of criticism that you find cropping up, and it continues for more than even a century, until even towards the end of the 20th century. So the idea was they constantly were trying to figure out how to acquaint them with the best methods of governing and teaching. So they even contemplate in the 1850s that this entire Pandit class of teachers should be gradually rid of. So in summary, what they were saying was, not only were teaching methods out of date, the curriculum taught by the Pandits, they were also referred to as Pulavars, was seen to be outdated, traditional and antediluvian. In the view of the administrators, their problem also was that in the whatever texts that they taught, there was no prose literature, and they used only poetry texts, which the vocabulary of which is far removed from the ordinary speaking and writing, as if it were another language. So it is this time that the normal schools are also created. That is, the schools meant to train teachers. So that institution to this day you can find in Saidapet. It has these normal schools have mutated into what is now called DIETs. It is District Institute of Educational Training. Basically, teachers who are completely unfit to teach, even teach students, they are actually sent there to train teachers. So that is the long and short of that institution. So then this problem was, and in this situation, what was the status of the Pandit in that society? Well, usually the index in our society is the salaries. The vernacular teachers, all language teachers, and when I say vernacular, this excludes Sanskrit. I'll come to it if we have time. So the vernacular teachers, Tamil teachers, Malayalam teachers, others were paid very low salaries. Now, I want to give you some figures, comparative figures. In 1870, the salary of a director of public instruction was rupees 2,000 per month. Okay, 1870. So I think in this entire cohort, I think probably Prabhat or Romila would be the oldest teachers. I think Prabhat or Romila would have drawn some 600, 700 rupees on their first job in their 1960s. Okay, so 2,000 rupees per month. Then the principal of the Presidency College received rupees 1,250 per month. That tradition continues to this day. The principals of colleges are on a higher grade pay, more than, it is equivalent to that of a university professor. Then the inspector of schools was paid rupees 1,000 per month. And even there in the various colleges, the principals received different categories of salaries. The principal of the famous Kumbakonam Government College, monthly salary was rupees 750. Now, what was the Tamil teacher earning? At the same time, Tyara Chettiar, Tamil professor at, Tamil teacher, no professors, Tamil teacher at Kumbakonam College, he was, on the day of retirement, he was receiving a salary of rupees 50. But this is a very highly inflated figure because Kumbakonam College was very special. So generally, other college teacher, other language teachers generally earned about rupees 30 or rupees 20 or even as low as rupees 15. So now you have to imagine, you have a teacher earning rupees 15 can that person stand up to the principal of a college who is receiving 1,250? So this is the situation. So I can give you more and more figures. So this was so low that even the DPI agreed that the salaries are undoubtedly low and imply as a necessary correlative a low standard of attainments on the part of the teachers. So given this humiliating and impoverished condition of Tamil teachers, who were designated as pundits. They were not designated as teachers. So here I want to underline the use of the word pandit. Pandit is a very pejorative word. Please don't equate it with something like pedantry. Pedantry compared to Panditattanam is a exalted word. In Tamil, Panditattanam or Pandit would mean whole range of things like, outdated, old-fashioned, antediluvian, low-paid, whole range of things. And the other sticking point was that Sanskrit teachers were actually paid much more than Tamil teachers. In fact, the other problem with this category was that, as I said, all other teachers were designated as teachers, or if it was a college or a university, lecturer, professor, etc. Language teachers were referred to only as pandits, which meant that they were not on time scales. So no automatic annual increments. Then they could never hold any administrative position in the college or school, so they could not become headmasters. Then this odd money that teachers used to make even 20-30 years ago, they could not do invigilation in the examination hall, which would have given them a few rupees. No invigilation, no supervisory work in the colleges. So this entire situation was such that the Tamil teachers had a very low status. And to give one example, when Pundi Aranganatha Mudalayar, an amazing man who gave the convocation address in the University of Madras in 1892 or something, he was both professor of maths and philosophy, and he was earning a monthly salary of 500 rupees. So when he went to visit Tyagaraja Chettiar at his house, everybody else in the college ridiculed him and want him. Why do you want to? He's Verum Pandidar. He's just a Pandit. Why are you going and visiting him? Of course, Pundi Aranganatha Mudalayar gave them a piece of his mind. So apart from this situation was that the status of the language itself was very low. What was the kind of status given to the Tamil language and the other Indian languages? As I said, they were referred to as vernacular in opposition to the category of the classical. So what were the classical languages? Sanskrit was a classical language, Arabic, Persian, and they also had Latin and Greek were also taught in some colleges, and these came under the category of the classical. So you will find that in almost all the autobiographies that you read of that time, you will find that the Tamil teacher is ridiculed, and only by great effort they are able to command the respect of their students. And that is a very important trope in all these autobiographies. All you have to do is, remind yourself of, Braithwaite's To Serve with Love. You have to win the respect of the students. This is an exact contrast to, even the Sanskrit Pandit who had a higher status. So, and this also came with another problem. Slowly at one point in the early part of the 20th century, the university, which was the university in those days, not only managed tertiary education, but also intermediate education. So what was called FA, First Examination in Arts. So after school, 2 years of FA and then 2 years of Bachelor of Arts. And of course there was actually very interesting, there was no MA by study. You finish your BA, honors, and then after 1 year, it's like the Oxford system. So you pay a small fee and your BA honors is converted into an MA. So this is the system, and they want to do away with it. And how they do it is, they put languages in 2 baskets. One basket of called the classical languages, and you have to choose one of them. And then there is a basket of vernacular languages, and you have to choose one of them. What the university tried to do was, at one point, they wanted to do away with the teaching of vernacular languages in toto. But then there was a big protest, and there was a huge uproar, and that is part of the story. How the status of language improves through kind of cultural politics. So I will not go into it. So only from about 19 teens, as I said, the university becomes a research department, and for the first time, language teaching also, the departments are created. But even then, there is no department of Tamil or Malayalam or Kannada. It is called a department of Dravidian philology, which later becomes Department of Dravidian languages, and this continues until the time of independence. So until the 1940s or 50s, it was used to be called the Oriental Institute. If you go to the Madras University on Beach Road, there is a separate building. It's like an outcast. There is a separate building, and there it used to come under the frame of Oriental languages, where there were different language teachers. That would be one or two for Tamil, one for Malayalam, one for Kannada, and the highest position was a reader. So here one more bit of information that I want to add is that, how do you qualify yourself to be a Tamil teacher? So there is no course for actually training or creating Tamil teachers. So who becomes a Tamil teacher? So until the very early part of the 20th century, even up to the 1920s or 30s, somebody who claimed proficiency in Tamil would get a certificate from a established scholar, and that certificate would be used to get this Pandit position. Then slowly they wanted to streamline it, and that is when institutions like Madurai Tamil Sangam and Karandai Tamil Sangam began to introduce systematic study of language, and they had 2 or 3 grades. It would be something called Pravesa Pandidam, Bala Pandidam, and Pandidam, 3 categories. But very interesting is that, for Sanskrit, to become a Pandit in Sanskrit, if you read Sanskrit alone or claimed to know Sanskrit alone, you could get a job. Until even 30-40 years ago, to get a job in Archaeological Survey of India, you don't need to be a archaeologist or epigraphist. You don't need to have even been a PWD contractor to become a archaeologist in ASI. What you needed to do was have a degree in Sanskrit. If you have a degree in Sanskrit, you will be appointed archaeologist, you will become superintending archaeologist, go to the highest position. I don't know if it has changed. Probably it has been reinstated. Now we don't know. So but to become a Tamil Pandit, you would have to study Sanskrit also. That is why the term called Samapradana Vidwan came into existence. So to be a Tamil Pandit, you needed to know Sanskrit. So it was this situation which basically grades against the evolving sense of pride in the Tamil language. That part I will not go into. You are all familiar with it. Caldwell's work on Dravidian philology, how that creates a new kind of identity politics, along with this the discovery of the Sangam classics. Now, all these things happen. So in that context, they tried to mobilize themselves, organize themselves, and over the period of about 20-30 years, they strive to get recognition, and slowly they get little concessions, like they introduce Pandit training certificates. But everywhere there used to be a problem. The thing is, to this day it happens in Tamil Nadu. When students write 10th standard examination, if there are 20% or 25% failures, most of them would fail in English. You can somehow pass mathematics, but passing English is very difficult. So Tamil teachers, they had this problem. So to clear SLC, it becomes a problem. And then next, at the next level of undergraduate education, if you wanted to get a BA, once again English is a problem. If you'll remember, I don't know whether there are teachers of that generation. It used to be called, do you teach Tamil or do you teach English, whatever they say. Oh, I teach part 1 in English. Remember that? The phrase called part 1 English. Now what we have done in Tamil Nadu is, we have just changed the nomenclature. We call it part 1 Tamil and part 1 English. The status is the same. But how does a Tamil teacher pass it? That is why they got around this by introducing a new categories of graduate study. There was one category called BOL. Anybody familiar with it? It was Bachelor of Oriental Learning. That was a graduate. Then the Bachelor of Language of Oriental Learning was converted into B.Lit, which is a B.Lit Tamil means you read only Tamil. There is no English paper, but still it would be called a degree. Why that is important? If you write your staff selection examination, if they say that you need degree, now you can produce B.Lit as a degree. So these kind of things happen, and this is a long process. The fight is continuing, the education system is expanding, new district board schools are established, but the status of the language teacher doesn't change. So the constant demand for them is, it could be from very symbolic demands to substantive demands. The symbolic demand was that, when they went for the convocation to get the titles or degrees, they used to call them titles, not degrees. And to tell you, the problem of titles and degrees continued until the fifth pay commission, until 1986. Were you teaching Uday in 1986? Not yet. So 1986 was the crucial pay commission revision. Until that point, the problem of Oriental colleges and regular, quote unquote, regular arts and science colleges existed. So when we talk about this politics, it is not something of the past. It is actually, it animates. So that is where to this day, not to this day, until 20 years ago, in colleges, we simply didn't have just assistant professor, associate professor, professor. There was a category called tutors. Remember? Your tutor would be somebody, could be either, somebody who class first in BA honors would become a tutor automatically, but a separate appointment would also be made at the level of tutor. In science departments, that would be called demonstrators. So until the fifth pay commission, the UGC had to constantly, when they had these fitment tables, they had to have separate categories for tutors, and always tutors were only in the languages. So this continues, and it goes on, and they keep fighting. But finally, what really empowers them? So our ultimate objective is to get time scales. We want to become, as Tamil teachers want to become assistant professors, associate professors, want to become university vice chancellors, and also honors. For instance, there was a very important New Year honor that the government gave in those days. It was called the Maha Mahopadhyaya Award. Those awards were given only for classical languages. Sanskrit and also Arabic and Persian had their own awards. And worse, the very first PhD in Tamil was awarded only in 1930. Before 1930, there was no PhD in Tamil. And until the 1950s, there are only 3 or 4 PhDs. And to make matters worse, the PhD thesis had to be written in English. A Tamil PhD thesis had to be written in English. And this continued until the 1970s. So you had, the great Tamil scholars submitting their PhD thesis in high school boy English. It's pathetic, you feel sorry, you want to shed a few tears. When Vasubha Manikam, who wrote the great classic Tamil Kadal, which you can read, that thesis can be read like a great work of art. But it was submitted originally as the Tamil concept of love, which is the most boring way it is written in such, you're making a great writer write in the level of a composition notebook. So that changes only in the 19th. So the kind of ignominies, the insults and that the teachers had to face was enormous. So it was so bad that many teachers tried to change themselves. For instance, they switched sartorial styles. Earlier, Tamil Pandits would be just dressed in one mundu and rendam mundu, that's all. Then they started wearing shirts. Then they started wearing shirts. Then what is this, closed coat of kind of thing? What is that? No, it's not a coat. Okay. So they started wearing it. Some people started wearing coats and suits. And so there was one scholar called A. Muthusivan, who taught in Alagappa College. He would always be dressed in suits, and he would go to play tennis. When asked why you are playing tennis, I said, I want to show that I am not a pandit. I can play tennis, so he would wear shoes and play tennis. No, it seems like a joke, but it's a very pain thing. And he said, it's very easy to kill me. If you want to kill me, just come near me and call me Pandit 3 times. I will die. So this is the level of, the kind of inferior social status that they had. They were constantly struggling against it. But the real moment which empowers them is that given their lowly status, their engagement with politics was very limited. So generally, as you would have imagined, most of the Tamil teachers until the 1920s were loyalists. So if there is Queen Victoria's proclamation 50th anniversary is celebrated, immediately they will write Arisir Kadinedi Lady Asri Viruttam, something like Kagali Viruttam or something, they'll write poems. When there is a darbar, they will write poems. When there is an accession to the throne, then they will write a poem. And they will dedicate their books to the king and king empress and queen empress with permission. You need to take permission in those days to dedicate books. This was the situation. Even during the Swadeshi movement, the Tamil teachers were not involved in politics. But with the rise of identity politics, non-Brahmin politics, Tamil identity politics, and the crucial change is 1937, when the Rajaji government, I'll just wind up in 5 minutes, during the Rajaji government first Congress ministry, the compulsory Hindi is introduced. That is when Tamil teachers mobilize in huge numbers. They hit the streets. They take the platform, speak against the government, which is something unbelievable for those times. And they write very strong, powerful polemics, booklets, songs, etc. And they become a core part of the Tamil identity politics. There is a flip side to it. The rising modernist literature once again rephrases their criticism of Pandits in modernist terms, referring to them as, Pandits who are using outdated language and things like that. I will not go into it. So in this context, by the time of Indian independence, that is where I will end. A very interesting figure called T.S. Avinasilingam Chettiar, who is a Gandhian, who is a devotee of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. His attitude towards language is completely shaped by Gandhian ideas. So these days what happens is Gandhian thinkers, they want to only emphasize the teaching of Hindi. The other part to it is also the development of the mother tongues. So there is very selective, Hindi Prachar Sabhas and others. So he had a better view. He said Tamil language should be developed, and he also was the key figure behind the production of the first modern encyclopedia in any Indian language. He also was very critical of Tamil teachers. He famously said once, Tamil teachers don't know how to operate an electric switch. That is how old-fashioned they are. But there used to be a joke, when apparently some boys were playing marbles on the street. Suddenly one boy looked up and said, he pointed out, he said, "Ada nama Tamil vadiyar cycle otrarpa." And I said, "Our Tamil teacher is riding the bicycle." Now he said, our Tamil teachers are doing real estate business, doing agency for Sakti Masala, everything they are doing, but we are talking about different times. So from this kind of image, I'm finishing. Yes, 2 minutes, just I'll apply the guillotine. So with this, they get empowered, and Avinash Lingam Chettiar is the first education minister who brings a time scale for teachers. So from about the late 1940s, around 1950, Tamil teachers are treated on a par with other teachers. So they have time scales, but it takes a very long time for them to actually keep pace with the other changes, because you have to change these institutional structures. But now, of course, Tamil teachers are as bad or as good as any other category of teachers, whether they be science teachers or but they have always, Tamil teachers have always been more knowledgeable and more committed to teaching than, I'm sorry to say, history teachers. That is why I went to JNU, and that's why I studied with K.N. Panikkar, and I consider it my very great fortune to have been his student. He was always very, very kind to me, very helpful, very supportive. So, and I think he lived a very fulfilling life. Probably could have produced, he could have made one very average student a better student, but some failures will always be there. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I take this occasion to thank all of them. My condolences to his family also. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Venkata Chalapathy. So now we'll have a lunch break, and after that we'll continue.